My name's Linsey Shea. I am a production and operations manager in the sports broadcast industry. So I'm basically an event planner for sports. I do all of the behind the scenes logistics that are required for broadcast to happen. So the people, places, and things, how somebody gets there, how they eat, security, credentials, parking, hotel arrangements, working with venues on permitting and any city regulations around what it is that we're trying to accomplish. It's kind of a short answer to it. I could get a little more detailed, but we'll go there. But I've been working on large-scale remote broadcasts over the last 10 years, primarily with the NFL Network. The last 2 years, I've served as the operations manager for the pre- and post-game show on Thursday Night Football. In that, I handle kind of the day-to-day operations of it. Obviously, 2020 changed a little bit of what we're doing in the sports industry. So I've somehow found this niche of being the person that does all of the mitigation logistics around COVID. So how we get things, the testing on site, the schedules of it, what's the best way to administer everything, all that good stuff. It's crazy. It's the little things of like literally parking and credentials. Like, where does the crew park? How many parking passes do we need? How much do they cost? Is that within budget? All that kind of stuff. This is probably a bigger issue than just football, which is recruitment. And I've been the beneficiary of this, is that it's a very small club. And so jobs aren't always posted, or if they are posted, they've already been filled. And, somebody asks their friend for a reference to hire a position. So I think the only way we change diversity in our executive positions is by changing our diversity in our feeder positions as well. And so the other night I was on I love Clubhouse. It's this new app that I'm like addicted to. But I was on Clubhouse the other day and we were talking about this question, which is, if you want to increase diversity, how do you go about doing that? And it's easy for me to make these statements as a white woman because I'm speaking from my position of privilege and what I've been able to accomplish through that. But the way I see it is, if I want to increase diversity, I have to start going to diverse sources and cultivating those relationships there. It's not just going back to my university, but it's going to historically Black colleges in the United States and cultivating relationships there. It's going to, support organizations in the industry and cultivating those relationships with women's organizations, BIPOC organizations, AAPI organizations. It's cultivating relationships outside of the little network, so that way when it comes time to say, hey, I need references for my manager of sponsorship, you're not just going to the same 5 people and getting 5 people that look like me, maybe a diverse candidate, maybe a woman, maybe a man of color, but you're really going to sources where you can create and cultivate true diversity. Because I think the other thing we have to remember is not everyone has the opportunity to go to and afford a top tier university. That has no bearing on their intelligence, their ability to do their job. And quite honestly, I think a lot of the soft skills that people who have to support themselves through college or who have had a much different path in life, the resilience, the adaptability, the work ethic that they bring, far outweigh what a GPA tells you. A GPA is just a measure. A degree is just a measure by a certain standard that's been in place for a long time that may or may not be relevant today. And I think the only way we can start cultivating diversity at the executive level is by cultivating diversity at the entry level. That's a good one. I think the reality is we have to start demanding it. You know what I mean? The organizations are going to continually default back to the response that, well, there's no demand. So they're not going to invest in it if we don't start asking. And I think that really starts from organizations like The Gist, from women who are engaged, men who are engaged, amplifying and promoting the stories of women in sports on their own social media channels. And, we are lucky in this day and age in that with digital distribution, we're not bound by the linear 24-hour schedule of programming. There's so many opportunities for us to see and share content. And would the lift be a lot easier if we had millions of dollars from name the network behind us? Absolutely. With investment comes a different return, but we don't start changing that narrative around there's no interest until we start demanding it. I also think we have to be understanding of the fact that as women, we are very far behind where men are. You know what I mean? Like in the United States, Title IX is really only about 40, 50 years old at this point in time compared to what the lead up men's sports has had. So you're really comparing two different things to say, oh, well, there's no interest, when up until the 1970s, women really weren't allowed to participate. There were no opportunities for them to participate, especially in collegiate sports. The investment in women's professional sports is not there to the extent of men's investment. Again, I think that's partially due to the time frame, but we can counteract that by, once the world opens up again, taking and supporting, like taking our children to these games. So if there's a WNBA game, taking your sons and daughters and showing them that it's perfectly normal and normalizing the experience of supporting women's sports to the same level at which you would support men's. We're sitting here and we're demanding it. And I'll be honest, I'm one of the guilty parties because I work in sports. Sometimes the last thing I want to do is talk about sports at the end of the day. But when we talk about, how do we change it? It's like, okay, if I'm just mindlessly doing something, do I need to have another like binged episode of Netflix on the background, or can I turn on the WNBA game just so they can get, another number to their rating? And so it's practicing what we preach in a lot of that and showing up and supporting and kind of doing that hard work to prove that the interest is there. I've kind of been lucky in a sense in that the people I work with in my immediate role, I'm in a very male dominated industry. My role as a production manager is very heavily female. So there's been a really great network of women that I found there. I think the reality right now is that people are just there's actually starting to be some action behind the words that people were putting out there. Beforehand, it kind of felt very much like lip service of like, to the extent of like you're hiring the token to show up to diversity and inclusion. Whereas now I think there's really a push from the outside. And I would say from the younger generation, from Gen Z and millennials, who are really speaking up and demanding this. And they're demanding it as consumers who are consuming a product. They're demanding it as the employees in the organization. So it's been hard because I don't think to date I've really seen a huge shift. And I think that's really because, again, working in the industry I work in, and I'm a beneficiary of this system of a lot of hiring as a freelancer, a lot of hiring gets done by word of mouth. And so we're kind of continually going to the same sources of, hey, who do you recommend for this? Hey, who do you know for that? And that's not great for increasing diversity and inclusion unless the people you are reaching out to are committed to promoting people of diverse backgrounds. It's tough because I've been so ingrained into as a freelancer, I've been in the TV industry, and I hate to say the NFL because I'm really working with just their media arm. And so I don't want to represent my experience to what's completely indicative of the NFL. I think where we can learn is by asking the questions. And it's funny because I literally just came from a conversation about this with some friends of mine, which is someone said is like, we don't need any more allies, we need accomplices. And so it's people like me, women, white men leading the way in the room and demanding that we start making these changes. It's saying like, looking through a stack of resumes, it's saying like, we're getting like these 10 guys, these are all recommendations from you. Like we've got 6 white men, 2 white women, 1 Black man, and 1 Latino man. Like this isn't diverse. Like this is not like, if you're telling me these are the 10 best candidates, without seeing any statistics, without seeing any, connections. Oh, this is my friend's brother's cousin's nephew. Like without seeing any of that, if you're telling me these are the 10 best candidates, then that is what it is. But if I'm only getting these 10 resumes because these 6 guys knew those 6 guys, these other 4 just happen to be 4 great resumes, like that's not diversity. So I think to me, learning comes from seeking outside your traditional network of recruitment and really putting energy and resources into cultivating relationships and understanding the barriers to entry for people from diverse or lower income communities, so things like unpaid internships, I think we need to do away with because they're restrictive entry to people from a lower income community. Because I always say this, like my first job paid me $1,200 a month. Like after taxes, that was $900 a month. Like I'm not going to knock my work ethic. I'm not going to knock the fact that like I took on a second job to have spending money and all of those things. But I could not have done that had it not been for the fact that my parents paid for my living, my house. I lived in my parents' second house. My parents paid for my car. My parents paid for my car insurance, my health insurance, and my cell phone. So really what you're talking about, what my expenses were gas in a small community where I was literally driving like 3 miles a day, and food to go out, and like food for the whatever I wanted to do for fun. So did I work hard? Did I understand the value of the dollar? To an extent, yeah, but that is not a typical experience. And I understand that there's a lot of people for whom that salary would have been a non-starter and they never would have gotten that experience because of the fact that they didn't have the resources or the familial support that I did. So things like that, I think we have to certainly understand what a true living wage is and how to support people who are coming from lower income communities who have the ability and the skill set and the drive and the desire and all these things that we say are necessary, but they don't have the same level of privilege or support that someone else may have. And so equaling that playing field and kind of removing some of those barriers to entry, I think are good first steps. Work ethic and privilege are not like mutually exclusive. Like both of those things can exist at the same time. I worked my butt off. I am very good at what I do, but I also had a very, very different starting line and a very different support system that is the definition of privilege. And without that, I don't know if I would be where I am today. And so I think we have to recognize how the things that we deem like entry level or earning your stripes or grinding it out are in theory systemic barriers that prohibit people from entering a sector and then building that network, because you can only build that network from the outside, from the inside out. Like it's very hard to break into from the outside in unless you, again, have a lot of support where you can travel and put yourself up at the high level events and afford to go out to where, coaches or staff are gathering, or, unless you have the ability to volunteer your time and your travel and do it without making money, it's very tough to do so. And so I think that's where the whole barriers to entry and this whole idea of it has to start at the bottom. It has to start at entry level if we're going to change it at the top. I think there has to be an idea. Don't take it personally. When we talk about accountability and diversity and inclusion, we're not making a morality judgment on whether or not you're a good or bad person. And I'm learning this myself. I've had this experience where somebody said something to me and it takes me by surprise because of my experience in the way in which I view the world and the lens through which I see things. But accountability means taking those uncomfortable moments, sitting with them, understanding why they feel uncomfortable, and thinking about how you can do better. And some of that does come from meaning that like, okay, like I'm not a bad person, but like, this isn't my place. Or like, you know what? I'm not a bad person. This was not my intent, but thank you for teaching me. Thank you for explaining it to me. Like, I recognize that my comment was out of an ignorance of your experience. Again, it's not a morality judgment. It is simply a learning experience and a learning tool. And I think far too often, and I'm speaking as a white woman, like we hear things like microaggressions or privilege or, we're not the ones to lead the conversation. And we get very taken aback because we want to help. But often it's not our place to speak about experiences we never went through. And it's also, growth requires being uncomfortable. It requires hearing things that you don't see about yourself and reflecting on them. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you're learning something new. And if we're not willing to learn something new each day and be a little bit uncomfortable and grow through it, then, we're never going to change anything.